Marianne Ashford's fingers trembled as she adjusted the silver tray, her reflection distorted in its polished surface, a ghost in her own home. Through the crack in the ballroom door, she watched elegant couples twirl beneath crystal chandeliers, while she remained hidden in shadows. 12 years of quiet imprisonment had taught her to move silently, to breathe without disturbing the air, to exist without being seen. The Duke of Wrexham's unexpected arrival sent whispers through the manor. His tall figure cutting through the crowd with purpose, his eyes somehow finding hers across the forbidden distance between servant and nobility. When their gazes locked, Marianne felt something awaken inside her chest, a dormant ember of the person she'd been forced to forget. The east wing of Ashford Manor had not seen proper heat in 12 winters. Marianne Ashford had learned to navigate its particular coldness. Which floorboards creaked, which window rattled in the north wind, which corner of her small room caught the weak winter sunlight for precisely 43 minutes each afternoon. These were the measurements of her existence. At 22, she lived as neither family nor servant. Lady Ashford, her father's second wife, had engineered this peculiar status with meticulous care after his death. The process of erasure had been gradual, almost gentle in its methodical cruelty. First, Marianne's portrait disappeared from the main hall, then her place at the dining table. Finally, her name itself became something rarely spoken aloud. "You should be grateful," Lady Ashford would say during her infrequent visits to the East Wing. "Many girls in your position would find themselves in far less comfortable circumstances. No dowry, no connections of consequence. What else could become of you?" Marianne had learned to nod and lower her eyes. "Yes, stepmother." The abandoned music room became her sanctuary. Its piano, slightly out of tune, but still playable, was her only real companion. She would play softly, her fingers finding melodies her father had taught her, careful that the sound wouldn't travel to the main house. The room's windows faced the woods rather than the garden, ensuring her privacy. Mrs. Green, the housekeeper, was the only one who acknowledged her existence with any warmth. She would bring extra blankets when the winter grew harsh, and occasionally smuggle books from the main library. "Your father would be heartbroken to see what's become of you," Mrs. Green had whispered once, quickly looking over her shoulder. "He loved you so." Marianne had simply nodded. Speaking of her father hurt too much. She remembered him vividly, his kind eyes, his patient hands guiding hers across piano keys, his voice warm with pride. "Music is the language of the soul, Mari," he would say. She played to keep that voice alive, even as the rest of the house conspired to forget it. Her stepsister Eleanor, 3 years younger and the image of her mother, had been instructed to treat Marianne with polite indifference. Sometimes Marianne caught a glimpse of the little girl who had once followed her around the gardens, begging for stories. But Lady Ashford's influence was absolute, and Eleanor had learned her lessons well. The summons came on a bitter December morning. Mrs. Green appeared at Marianne's door, her expression unreadable. "Lady Ashford requires your presence in the morning room," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Marianne followed, her heart quickening. She couldn't remember the last time she had been formally summoned. The main house felt foreign, too warm, too bright, too alive, with preparations for the upcoming Christmas festivities. Lady Ashford sat at her writing desk, not bothering to look up when Marianne entered. At 45, she remained striking, her posture perfect, her dark hair showing only the faintest threads of silver. "We are hosting a Christmas ball," she announced, finally raising her eyes. "The first since your father's passing. Eleanor will be formally introduced to society." Marianne stood silently, unsure why this concerned her. "We find ourselves short-staffed for such an important occasion," Lady Ashford continued. "Mrs. Green informs me that you are capable." Understanding dawned slowly. "You wish me to serve at the ball. Is that a problem?" Lady Ashford's voice carried a warning. Marianne thought of her father's house, now filled with strangers, who would not know her name. She thought of Eleanor, stepping into society in a gown that would have been selected with painstaking care. She thought of herself, invisible for so long that perhaps this was merely the natural conclusion. "No, stepmother, no problem." Mrs. Green will instruct you on your duties. You will wear the appropriate uniform. And Marianne, Lady Ashford's eyes narrowed slightly, you will remember your place. The days before the ball passed in a blur of activity. Marianne was assigned to help with preparations, polishing silver, arranging flowers, dusting chandeliers that had remained covered for years. The work was exhausting, but oddly satisfying. For the first time in years, she moved through the main house without feeling like an intruder. Mrs. Green provided a plain black dress with white collar and cuffs. "It's not right," the housekeeper muttered as she helped Marianne try it on. "Your mother would turn in her grave." "My mother would understand practicality," Marianne replied softly, "and this is practical." The night before the ball, Marianne slipped into the music room. Her fingers found a gentle melody, something her father had composed for her mother long ago. She played it softly, a private rebellion. "Miss Marianne?" She turned to find Mrs. Green in the doorway, a small package in her hands. "I found this," the housekeeper said, stepping forward. "It was your mother's." Inside the package was a simple silver hairpin with a small pearl. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that would draw attention, but undeniably fine. "I can't wear this tomorrow," Marianne whispered. "Not where anyone can see," Mrs. Green agreed. "But perhaps under your cap. Sometimes we carry our truths hidden, but they remain truths nonetheless." On the morning of the ball, Marianne pinned her hair severely and tucked her mother's hairpin beneath the starched white cap. She studied her reflection in the cracked mirror of her room. The young woman who stared back seemed a stranger. Neither the daughter of the house, nor truly a servant. Someone in between worlds, belonging nowhere. "Remember," she whispered to herself, "this house was once your home too." She took a deep breath and stepped out of her room, ready to serve at the Christmas ball where, for the first time in 12 years, the Ashford Manor would open its doors to society. And among those guests would be the Duke of Wrexham, though Marianne had no way of knowing how his arrival would change everything. The ballroom of Ashford Manor blazed with light. Hundreds of candles reflected in gilt-framed mirrors, creating the illusion of endless illumination. Marianne moved efficiently between guests, her silver tray balanced perfectly as she offered champagne. She had mastered the art of invisibility long before this night, eyes downcast, movements fluid and unobtrusive, presence acknowledged only when needed. From the servant's position, she observed Eleanor's entrance. Her stepsister looked radiant in pale blue silk, her golden hair arranged with fresh flowers. Lady Ashford stood nearby, pride evident in her posture as she introduced Eleanor to eligible gentlemen and their approving mothers. "The Duke of Wrexham," announced the butler at the entrance, his voice carrying over the gentle music and conversation. A ripple of interest moved through the crowd. Marianne cut her circuit with the tray, but curiosity made her glance toward the entrance. The Duke stood tall and imposing in the doorway, his formal attire impeccable, his expression reserved. At 35, Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Wrexham, carried his title with an understated dignity that commanded attention without seeking it. Lady Ashford moved immediately to greet him, drawing Eleanor forward. Marianne watched the formal introductions, the practiced curtsy of her stepsister, the Duke's polite bow. His face revealed nothing of his thoughts, as he accepted Lady Ashford's effusive welcome. Throughout the evening, Marianne observed him from her peripheral vision. Unlike many of the gentlemen present, he did not drink excessively or laugh too loudly. He danced when required, but seemed to prefer conversation in quieter corners. There was something in his manner that suggested he found such gatherings a duty, rather than a pleasure. As the night progressed, Marianne entered the small antechamber adjacent to the ballroom to refresh her tray. She was carefully arranging champagne glasses when she heard the door open behind her. "Pardon me," came a deep voice. "I was seeking a moment's respite." She turned to find the Duke himself, looking slightly apologetic for the intrusion. Up close, his features were more striking, intelligent eyes, a firm mouth that suggested he smiled rarely but genuinely. "Of course, Your Grace," she said, lowering her eyes and preparing to leave. "No need to depart on my account," his tone surprisingly gentle. "I merely wished to escape the matchmaking mothers for a moment." Something in his manner, the lack of dismissal in his voice, perhaps, made Marianne pause. They can be rather persistent, I imagine. A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her response. Servants didn't typically engage in conversation. Indeed, he replied after a moment, particularly when one has remained unwed for what society deems an unreasonable period. Marianne arranged the last glass on her tray. Perhaps society should concern itself with more meaningful matters. The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. It wasn't her place to offer opinions to a duke. But instead of offense, she saw curiosity in his expression. A refreshing perspective, he said quietly. May I ask your name? The question startled her. No guest had asked her name in years. Marianne, she answered simply, omitting her surname. He nodded, studying her with increasing interest. You speak like someone educated, Marianne. My father believed in education, Your Grace. She lifted the tray, preparing to return to her duties. And who was your father? The candlelight caught the side of her face as she hesitated. He loved music, she said finally, avoiding the direct question. If you'll excuse me, I must return to the ballroom. The Duke stepped aside, but his gaze followed her as she moved toward the door. You seem out of place here, he observed. Marianne paused at the threshold. We all play the roles assigned to us, Your Grace, she said softly, then slipped back into the crowded ballroom. Throughout the remainder of the evening, she felt his eyes finding her, occasionally across the room. Not in the way gentlemen sometimes looked at serving girls. There was no impropriety in his gaze. Rather, he seemed to be solving a puzzle. Near midnight, as she passed with a tray of sweetmeats, she overheard Lady Ashford speaking to another matron. The Duke seems most impressed with Eleanor, Lady Ashford said, satisfaction evident in her voice. I've invited him to stay a few days. The hunting is excellent, and it will give the young people time to become better acquainted. Marianne moved on, her face betraying nothing. The thought of the Duke remaining at Ashford Manor stirred an unexpected anxiety. His presence seemed to disturb the careful balance she had maintained for years. As the ball concluded and guests began to depart, Marianne was clearing abandoned glasses from a window alcove when she felt someone approach. The Duke stood a respectful distance away, his hands clasped behind his back. I understand you'll be staying at Ashford Manor, Your Grace, she said, acknowledging his presence with a small curtsy. News travels quickly below stairs, he observed, not unkindly. Some things are discussed openly, she replied. He studied her for a moment. I find myself curious about this house. Perhaps you might direct me to the library tomorrow? I understand the late Mr. Ashford had an excellent collection. Marianne hesitated. Mrs. Green would be better suited to show you the house, Your Grace. But you know it well, I think. His voice was quiet, his eyes intent on her face. Before she could respond, Lady Ashford appeared, smiling broadly. Ah, Your Grace. I hope everything has been to your satisfaction. Perfectly so, Lady Ashford, he replied smoothly, his manner shifting to formal politeness. I was just commenting on the excellent service. Lady Ashford barely glanced at Marianne. Yes, we've trained the staff well. Now shall we discuss tomorrow's riding plans? Eleanor is an accomplished horsewoman. As they walked away, the Duke glanced back once. In that brief look, Marianne felt something shift, as though a door long closed had been discovered, its lock not quite as secure as everyone had believed. 3 days after the Christmas ball, Marianne returned to her routine in the East Wing. The excitement of the festivities had faded, leaving the house in that peculiar lull between Christmas and the New Year. She had seen nothing of the Duke since that night, though she knew from the servants' conversations that he remained a guest, participating in hunting expeditions and evening card games. She was in the music room, playing softly when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Unfamiliar, measured steps that didn't belong to Mrs. Green or any of the servants who occasionally ventured into this forgotten part of the house. The door opened without a knock. The Duke of Wrexham stood in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. Forgive me, he said immediately. I was exploring and heard music. Marianne stood quickly, her hands falling from the keys. Your Grace, this wing is seldom used, so I gathered. He remained at the threshold, as if understanding he had intruded on something private. I didn't expect to find a music room here, nor to find you in it. She smoothed her simple dress, acutely aware of her informal appearance. I come here sometimes to practice. You play beautifully. He gestured toward the piano. That was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but with a variation I've not heard before. Surprise flickered across her face. You know music, Your Grace. I studied it in my youth. A shadow passed briefly over his features, though I seldom play now. He stepped into the room, his gaze taking in the sheet music, the worn bench, the faded curtains. This room has been used regularly, despite its condition. It's quiet here, she said simply. The Duke moved to the piano, running his fingers lightly over the wood. This is a fine instrument, though it needs tuning. Yes, Marianne agreed, watching him carefully. It was my father's. He looked up sharply. Your father's? She hesitated, then decided on truth. Henry Ashford was my father. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're not a servant. You're Miss Ashford. I was, she corrected quietly. Now I'm simply Marianne. The Duke studied her with new intensity. Lady Ashford introduced only Miss Eleanor as her daughter. Eleanor is her daughter. I am merely her husband's child from his first marriage. Marianne moved toward the window, putting distance between them. After my father died, things changed. You were removed from society, he said, his voice hardening slightly, hidden away. She turned back to him, her chin lifting. I was given accommodation in my father's house. Many in my position would not be so fortunate. Is that what she tells you? The Duke's expression was unreadable. That you should be grateful for being erased? The directness of his question startled her. No one had ever stated her situation so plainly. It doesn't matter what I think, Your Grace. This is how things are. He moved to the piano bench and sat, his fingers hovering over the keys. Would you play that variation again? The one I heard when I entered. The request was so unexpected that Marianne found herself moving to the piano before she could consider the propriety. She stood beside the bench, uncertain. Please, he said, shifting to make room. Show me. She sat carefully, maintaining proper distance, and began to play. The music filled the dusty room, transforming it. Her fingers moved with confidence, finding the notes that had become her private language over the years. Here, she said softly, reaching the variation. This is where I changed it. The Duke watched her hands intently. It's beautiful. More hopeful than the original. My father always said music should offer hope, even in melancholy. She continued playing, her tension gradually easing. Did your father compose as well as play? He asked. Yes, he left several unfinished pieces. She nodded toward a cabinet in the corner. I've tried to complete some of them over the years. The Duke was silent for a moment, listening as she finished the piece. When the last note faded, he spoke quietly. Would you show me one of his compositions? Marianne hesitated, then stood and went to the cabinet. She returned with several yellowed sheets of music. This was the last one he was working on before he fell ill. The Duke examined the notation carefully. May I? He asked, gesturing to the piano. She nodded, moving aside to give him room. His fingers touched the keys with surprising gentleness, bringing her father's music to life. He played with skill and sensitivity, though she could tell it had been some time since he had practiced regularly. It's unfinished, he said when he reached the abrupt ending. Yes. He never had the chance to complete it. Have you tried? She shook her head. That particular piece. I never found the right ending. The Duke studied the music again. It's seeking something. Resolution, but not the obvious kind. Yes, she said, surprised by his insight. That's exactly it. A noise in the corridor made them both look up. Mrs. Green appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight of them at the piano together. Your Grace, she said, curtsying quickly. Lady Ashford has been looking for you. The hunting party is assembling. Thank you, Mrs. Green. He stood, returning the music to Marianne. Please tell Lady Ashford I'll join them shortly. When Mrs. Green had gone, he turned back to Marianne. I would like to return, if I may. Perhaps we could work on your father's piece together. She looked at him in surprise. That would hardly be appropriate, Your Grace. Arthur, he said quietly. My name is Arthur. Even less appropriate, she replied, though without sharpness. He smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Music transcends social boundaries, does it not? And I find myself missing it. Marianne considered his words. The idea of sharing music again, of having someone understand this part of her life, was powerfully tempting. If you wish, Your Grace. Tomorrow afternoon, he suggested. I believe the ladies will be making calls, and the gentlemen have planned a shooting expedition that holds little interest for me. She nodded, unable to articulate why this felt both dangerous and necessary. After he left, Marianne remained at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys without pressing them. Mrs. Green returned a few minutes later, her expression troubled. Be careful, child, she said softly. He seems a good man, but... It's only music, Mrs. Green, Marianne assured her, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. The housekeeper sighed. Your father would be pleased to hear his piano played again. He always said you had his gift for music. Did he? Marianne looked up, hungry for any memory of her father. He said it was the only true light in this house. Mrs. Green patted her hand gently. Some lights can't be extinguished, no matter how hard others try. For 2 weeks they met in the music room, whenever the Duke could excuse himself from the holiday activities. Their collaboration began tentatively. He would suggest a phrase. She would offer a variation. Gradually, the awkwardness between them dissolved into a shared language of notes and rhythms. Your father had an unusual approach to harmony, Arthur observed one afternoon as they worked on extending a difficult passage. He believed in finding beauty in unexpected places. Marianne replied, her fingers demonstrating a minor chord that somehow resolved into something hopeful. These hours became precious to her moments, when she existed not as the forgotten daughter or the silent servant, but simply as herself. The Duke, too, seemed to shed some of his reserve in the music room, occasionally sharing stories of his own musical education. Why did you stop playing? She asked him once, his hand still on the keys. My wife loved music, he said after a pause. After she died, I couldn't bear it. I'm sorry, Marianne said softly. It was 5 years ago. He touched a single key, the note hanging between them. This is the first time I've played since then. The intimacy of this confession lingered in the air. Marianne felt the weight of it, that he had chosen to break his silence here, with her. One gray afternoon, Marianne was returning from the kitchen with a cup of tea when she passed the partially open door of the morning room. Inside, she could see Lady Ashford and the Duke seated close together, speaking in low, serious tones. Eleanor is young, certainly, but she has been raised to manage a household of consequence, Lady Ashford was saying. Her dowry is substantial, and her connections impeccable. I don't doubt Miss Eleanor's qualities, the Duke replied, his voice measured. Then we may hope for an announcement before you depart, Lady Ashford pressed. The match would be most advantageous. Marianne stepped back from the door, a cold feeling spreading through her chest. Of course. This had been Lady Ashford's intention all along. The Christmas ball, the extended invitation to stay at Ashford Manor, all designed to secure a ducal match for Eleanor. She moved away silently, the tea forgotten in her hand. How foolish she had been to think their musical interludes meant anything beyond passing entertainment for a bored aristocrat. Once married to Eleanor, he would become part of the family that had erased her. That evening, she did not go to the music room, nor the next day. When Mrs. Green came to inquire, Marianne claimed a headache. He asked after you, the housekeeper said, studying her face, seemed concerned. Please tell His Grace I'm indisposed, Marianne replied, turning away to hide her expression. Mrs. Green sighed heavily. Child, what happened? Nothing happened. Nothing could happen. Marianne stared out at the winter landscape. I simply remembered my place. 3 days passed. On the 4th, Mrs. Green appeared at her door with an unusual expression, part concern, part satisfaction. There was quite a scene at breakfast, she reported, settling into the room's single chair. Lady Ashford made some pointed remarks about Eleanor's suitability as a duchess. Marianne tensed, and the Duke very politely but very firmly stated that he has no intention of remarrying at present, and furthermore, he specifically requested that his name not be used to advance any young lady's prospects without his explicit permission. Marianne's hands, which had been mechanically folding linens, stilled. He said that, In front of the entire breakfast party, Mrs. Green's eyes twinkled. Lady Ashford turned quite pale. Relief washed over Marianne, followed immediately by shame. She had misjudged him, assuming his intentions aligned with her stepmother's schemes. "There's more," Mrs. Green continued. "He asked about you, about your history in this house. I told him what I could." She leaned forward. "I told him about your father's will, how it provided for you until marriage or your 25th birthday, how Lady Ashford found ways to reinterpret those provisions." "Mrs. Green, you shouldn't have." "Someone should have spoken years ago," the housekeeper interrupted firmly. "Your father never intended for you to be treated this way. His music was the only light in this house," he used to say. "And you were the light in his life." Tears pricked at Marianne's eyes. "It doesn't matter now, doesn't it?" Mrs. Green stood. "The Duke leaves tomorrow. He asked me to give you this." She handed Marianne a folded note. Inside, written in a strong, clear hand, was a simple message. "The music room, 4 o'clock, please." After Mrs. Green left, Marianne sat for a long time with the note in her hands. Part of her wanted to go, to explain her absence, to see him once more before he departed. Another part, the part that had learned caution through years of quiet erasure, warned against it. As the afternoon light began to fade, she made her decision, not based on what he might offer or what he might think, but on what she needed to reclaim for herself. She would go to the music room, not for him, but for herself, for the father who had loved her, for the music that had sustained her, for the person she had been before she learned to make herself small. As she prepared to leave her room, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed different somehow, less a shadow, more a person with substance and will. Before any rescue, she whispered to herself, "I need to remember how to exist." A year passed. The seasons turned from winter's grip to spring's renewal, through summer's warmth and autumn's golden melancholy, until winter returned to Ashford Manor. The Duke had left as planned the day after their missed meeting. Marianne had gone to the music room at the appointed time. But whether he had come and gone or never arrived at all, she never knew. Yet something had changed within her after that day. Slowly, deliberately, she began to reclaim small territories of her former life. She took meals in the small breakfast room rather than her chamber. She walked the grounds daily, regardless of weather. She spoke when spoken to, no longer waiting for permission to exist. Lady Ashford noticed these subtle rebellions, but found herself strangely powerless to counter them. There was a quiet determination in her stepdaughter now, a certainty that seemed impervious to cutting remarks or cold dismissals. When the invitations for the Christmas ball went out again, Marianne learned of it not through whispers, but because she was present when Lady Ashford discussed the arrangements. "I suppose you'll want to help with the preparations again," Lady Ashford said, her tone suggesting this was a concession rather than a request. "Yes," Marianne replied simply, "I would." As the day approached, rumors circulated below stairs that the Duke of Wrexham had accepted the invitation. Eleanor, now 20, was still unmarried, though she had received several respectable offers during the London season. Lady Ashford still has hopes in that direction, Mrs. Green confided to Marianne as they arranged evergreen boughs along the main staircase. Marianne nodded, her expression revealing nothing. Eleanor would make a suitable duchess. The housekeeper studied her face. "You've changed this past year." "Have I?" "You stand straighter. You look people in the eye." Mrs. Green smiled slightly. "You remind me of your father." The night of the ball arrived, crisp and clear, stars sharp against the black December sky. Unlike the previous year, Marianne was not dressed as a servant. She wore a simple gray dress, modest but undeniably that of a gentlewoman. Her hair was arranged simply, adorned only with her mother's pearl pin, now worn visibly. Lady Ashford had protested this development, but Marianne had quietly pointed out that the terms of her father's will entitled her to appropriate clothing and a place in the household until her 25th birthday or marriage. When her stepmother had demanded to see this provision, Marianne had calmly recited the relevant passage from memory. She did not join the receiving line, nor was she formally presented to the guests. Instead, she moved through the edges of the gathering, occasionally exchanging words with older guests who remembered her father. The Duke's arrival caused the same stir as the previous year. He greeted Lady Ashford and Eleanor with perfect courtesy, then scanned the room as if searching for someone. When his eyes found Marianne, a subtle change came over his expression. Recognition, followed by something warmer. As the evening progressed, she felt his awareness of her, though they did not speak. He danced with Eleanor once, conversed with the gentleman about politics and hunting, performed all the expected social rituals with impeccable manners. It was during a lull in the music, as servants circulated with refreshments, that he finally approached her. She stood near a window, watching snow begin to fall outside. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly. She turned, meeting his gaze directly. "Your Grace, you look well." His eyes took in her altered appearance, the subtle differences in her bearing. "Thank you, as do you." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "I came to the music room that day," he said finally. "As did I," she replied, though perhaps not at the same hour. Understanding passed between them. A recognition of the near miss. The connection almost formed. "I've thought often of your father's unfinished composition," he said. "Have you completed it?" she asked. "No." His eyes held hers steadily. Some pieces require collaboration to find their true ending. Before she could respond, he glanced toward the center of the room, where Lady Ashford was watching them with poorly concealed displeasure. Then, with deliberate purpose, he extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Miss Ashford?" The request silenced the nearest conversations. Marianne felt the weight of eyes turning toward them, the ripple of surprise moving through the gathering. "Your Grace," she began, hesitant not for her sake but for his. "Perhaps you don't understand what you're asking." "I understand perfectly," he replied, his hand remaining extended. "I am asking the daughter of this house to dance with me." The simple declaration, spoken clearly enough to be heard by those nearby, fell into the room like a stone into still water. Marianne saw Lady Ashford's face pale, saw Eleanor's eyes widen, saw the confused glances exchanged by guests who had been told there was only one Ashford daughter. She placed her hand in his. "Then I accept." He led her to the center of the floor as the musicians, after a moment's hesitation, began to play. They moved together with formal precision, maintaining proper distance, speaking not a word. Yet in that silence was a declaration. He had named her, recognized her, restored her to visibility, as they turned beneath the chandeliers. Marianne caught sight of a small circle of melting snow on the windowsill where she had stood earlier. Like that snow, something frozen within her was finally thawing, drop by silent drop. Spring came early to Ashford Manor. February brought unexpected warmth, melting the last of the winter snow and coaxing early crocuses from the earth. The east wing, for so long a cold and forgotten corner of the house, had undergone a transformation. The windows gleamed. The floors had been polished, and fresh paint brightened the walls. Most significant was the change in the music room. The piano had been professionally tuned, the curtains replaced, the furniture restored. Morning light streamed through clean windows, falling across the instrument where Marianne sat, her fingers moving confidently over the keys. The Christmas ball had marked a turning point. The Duke's public acknowledgement of her identity had forced Lady Ashford to acknowledge her stepdaughter's existence. However reluctantly, questions had been asked, explanations demanded. In the aftermath, certain truths had emerged that could no longer be ignored. The Duke had departed the day after the ball, but had returned frequently in the months since. Each visit included time in the music room, where he and Marianne continued their work on her father's unfinished composition. What had begun as a musical collaboration had evolved into something deeper, a partnership of minds, and increasingly of hearts. Today he was expected again. Marianne played softly, working through a difficult passage they had been struggling to resolve. The door opened quietly, and she looked up to find him standing there, watching her with undisguised admiration. "You've solved it," he said, moving to join her at the piano. "I think so." She shifted to make room for him on the bench. "Listen." She played the section again, demonstrating how she had found a way to bridge the gap between her father's original notes. and the conclusion they had been seeking. "It's perfect," he said when she finished. "It honors his intention while finding its own voice. Like a conversation between past and present," she agreed. They worked together for the next hour, refining and polishing, until the piece flowed seamlessly from beginning to end. When the final notes faded, they sat in companionable silence, both aware of what they had accomplished. "It's finished," she said softly. "Yes." He turned slightly to face her. "Marianne, there's something I must ask you." She met his gaze steadily. The past months had taught her to trust not only him, but herself. "Yes, Arthur." "Your circumstances have changed since Christmas," he began carefully. "Lady Ashford has been forced to acknowledge your position. Your future is more secure, thanks in no small part to you," she acknowledged. He shook his head. "You reclaimed your place before I returned. I merely provided an opportunity for public recognition of what you had already accomplished." Sunlight caught the side of his face, illuminating the earnestness in his expression. Outside, melting snow dripped from the eaves, marking the passage of time with gentle persistence. "What I wish to ask," he continued, "is whether you might consider a future that extends beyond Ashford Manor." Marianne's hands rested lightly on the keys, not pressing them. "What sort of future do you envision, Arthur?" "One where you are never again hidden or diminished." He took her hand gently. "One where your music and your voice are heard. One that we might build together, as equal partners." She studied their joined hands. "A duchess is expected to fulfill certain roles, maintain certain appearances." "Yes," he agreed. "But a wife, my wife, would be expected first and foremost to be herself. The woman I have come to admire and love is not one who disappears into a title or a role." The word love hung in the air between them, neither rushed nor withheld, but offered as simply as a musical note, true and resonant. "I don't seek rescue," she said quietly. "I've learned to stand on my own. I know." His smile was gentle. "That's precisely why I'm asking, not to save you, but to walk beside you." Marianne considered his words. The past year had taught her that freedom came not from escape, but from claiming one's rightful place, one's voice, one's truth. She had done that here, in the house that had both imprisoned and sheltered her. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady, "I will marry you, Arthur. Not as a refuge from this place, but as a choice to build something new." His face brightened with joy, though his manner remained characteristically reserved. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not ostentatious, but elegantly crafted, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. Marianne looked down at the ring, then at the completed musical score before them. "We should sign it," she said, reaching for a pen. "Both of us." He understood immediately. She wrote her name first, Marianne Ashford, in clear, confident script at the bottom of the final page. He added his own beside hers, Arthur Blackwood. "A true collaboration," he said, looking at their names side by side. Through the window, they could see the last of the winter snow melting in the garden, making way for new growth. The light caught the edge of the paper, illuminating their signatures and the music they had created together. A composition begun in one life and completed in another, bridging past and future, with notes that spoke of both loss and renewal. In that moment of quiet completion, Marianne understood that her father had been right. Music was indeed the language of the soul, and some melodies, once started, would always find their way to their proper ending.